Welcome to another episode of the Midnight Investigator, where we take another alternative look at moments in history. Okay, so we are going back to the American Civil War, to a battlefield where the ground turned to mud, the woods filled with smoke, and thousands of wounded men were left in the dark. And in that darkness, a story emerged that sounds impossible. A story of wounds that glowed. They call it Angel's Glow. The tale says that after one of the bloodiest battles of the early war, some soldiers looked down and saw a faint blue-green light coming from their injuries. Not a lantern, not a spark. A cold glow, shining from inside torn flesh. And the legend adds one more unsettling detail. The men whose wounds glowed were said to survive more often than the ones who did not. If that were true, it would be one of the strangest moments in American history. A battlefield miracle. Or something far darker. So tonight we do what we always do. We separate the atmosphere from the evidence. We go back to the history. Then we follow the story trail and ask the real question. When did Angel's Glow actually begin? The setting is Tennessee, April 1862. The war is still young, but already the scale is shocking. Two massive armies collide near a small church called Shiloh. The place name means peace, but what happens there is anything but peaceful. The battle begins on the morning of April 6, 1862. Confederate forces launch a surprise attack on Union camps near Pittsburgh, landing on the Tennessee River. It is not a neat line of soldiers advancing politely. It is chaos, gunfire in the trees, camps overrun, men waking to shouting and smoke, units breaking apart and reforming on the run. All day the fighting surges back and forth through woodland and fields. At times it becomes close range and personal. The kind of fighting where soldiers can see the fear in each other's faces. By the end of the first day, the Union Army is pushed back toward the river. And the field is littered with the wounded. That night matters. Because Shiloh is not just about the battle. It is about what happens after the battle, when the noise fades and the suffering does not. Rain and mud are part of the story. The ground is soaked. The air is cold. Medical systems are overwhelmed. Field hospitals are primitive. Stretchers are scarce. Surgeons are exhausted. And many wounded men are simply left where they fell. This is the part that modern retellings often soften. They should not. In 1862, infection is a silent killer. There are no antibiotics. There is limited understanding of germs. A wound that might be survivable today can become a death sentence within days. And at Shiloh, men lie out for hours in filthy conditions, some for an entire night, some longer. Not just in pain, but in fear. Alone in the dark, listening to cries fade into silence. The battle continues on April 7th. Fresh Union reinforcements arrive, and the Union line stiffens. The Confederates are pushed back. By the end of the second day, the Confederates retreat, and the Union holds the field. The battle is over, but the cost is enormous. Tens of thousands are killed, wounded, or missing. Shiloh shocks the country. People realize this war is not going to be quick. And this is where Angel's Glow steps in. The story says that during that first night, while wounded men lay on the wet ground, some noticed a strange light in their injuries. A faint luminescence, like moonlight trapped under skin. The glow becomes part of the memory of Shiloh, passed around later as a whisper. And the most haunting claim of all is that the glow seemed protective, that those wounds were less infected, that those men were more likely to live. It is a perfect story. It has horror, mystery, and a kind of grim comfort. The idea that in the worst moment, something unseen showed mercy. No wonder people want it to be true. But here is where the investigation turns. A story can feel true and still be false. So the next question is simple. Where's the record? Where are the letters? Where are the diaries? Where are the surgeon's notes? Where is the mention, at the time, of men whose wounds glowed in the dark? When historians go looking, they hit a wall. Shiloh is one of the most written about battles of the war. There are thousands of personal accounts, memoirs, official reports, and later interviews. Yet the famous version of Angel's Glow is strangely hard to locate in wartime sources. That does not mean it could not have happened. But it does mean we should be careful with what we claim. So if the story is not strongly rooted in 1862 paperwork, how did it become so well known? The answer takes us forward in time, not back. In 2001, a science fair project brings Angel's Glow roaring into the modern world. The story is presented as a known piece of Civil War folklore, and two students decide to test whether it could have a real explanation. That project is then written up and shared widely, and suddenly Angel's Glow is everywhere. Articles, videos, museum conversations, classroom lessons. It becomes common knowledge almost overnight. And with it comes a scientific explanation that is almost too perfect, because it makes the legend feel real. The proposed culprit is a bacterium called Photohaptis luminescens. Even the name sounds like it belongs in a midnight story. Luminescence means glowing. This bacterium can produce a faint blue-green light under the right conditions. Not like a torch, but enough to be visible in darkness. But it does not usually live in humans. It lives in the soil, in a strange partnership with tiny parasitic worms called nematodes. The nematodes infect insects. Inside the insect, the nematode releases the bacteria. The bacteria help kill the insect and protect the food source by producing chemicals that suppress other microbes. And sometimes the whole infected insect can glow faintly. So the theory goes like this. Shiloh's wounded men were lying in wet soil, in terrible conditions, with open wounds exposed. If nematodes carrying that glowing bacterium came into contact with injuries, the bacteria might have entered the wounds. And because the bacteria can produce antimicrobial compounds, it might have reduced infection from other deadly bacteria. That could explain both parts of the story. The glow and the better survival. It is a clever idea, and it is not pure fantasy. Bioluminescent bacteria exist. Antimicrobial compounds exist. Strange infections exist. Nature does things that sound supernatural until you see them under a microscope. But now comes the next hard question. Even if it is biologically plausible, did it actually happen at Shiloh? Or did a modern explanation attach itself to a story that was never properly recorded in the first place? This is where many historians raise an eyebrow. Because the strongest modern criticism is not about the biology. It is about the documentation. If glowing wounds were truly observed in large numbers, why do we not see it described in the immediate aftermath? Why do we not see soldiers writing home about it? Why do we not see surgeons noting it as an oddity? Why do we not see it in the way other battlefield horrors were recorded? And there is another uncomfortable possibility. That the story may have existed only as a loose anecdote, or not existed at all until it gained a scientific backbone. That once a neat scientific explanation appeared, the legend became more believable, more shareable, more fixed. It went from a vague rumor to a named phenomenon. Angel's Glow, a label that makes it feel official. That does not mean someone invented it maliciously. This is how folklore works. A strange idea gets repeated, the details sharpen. The setting becomes famous, the explanation arrives and retrofits the story. And suddenly, people speak as if it was always known. So what is the most honest conclusion? Here it is. Angel's Glow is a powerful legend tied to a very real horror. The Battle of Shiloh happened. The casualties happened. The mud, the rain, the suffering, the nights on the field, all of it is beyond dispute. The conditions for infection were real. The desperation was real. And the human need to find meaning in suffering is real. The glowing wound story is harder to pin down. The modern explanation is plausible in theory, but the historical trail is thin, and the story's popularity appears to surge in the modern era, especially after the 2001 science fair explanation circulated. Which leaves us with a final twist that is just as unsettling as glowing wounds. Maybe the mystery is not whether soldiers glowed. Maybe the mystery is how easily a good explanation can turn a story into history. The stark reality is this. Angel's Glow, as it is commonly told, does not stand up to serious historical scrutiny. There is no solid wartime record of glowing wounds at Shiloh. No letters written home in disbelief. No surgeons pausing to note an impossible light in torn flesh. And in some ways, the legend distracts us from a far more uncomfortable truth, that the American Civil War did not need miracles or mysteries to be horrifying. The reality was already brutal enough. Field hospitals of the time were crude, overwhelmed, and desperately underprepared. Surgery was performed without anesthetic, often without proper sanitation, sometimes without even enough bandages. Infection was rampant. Amputation was routine. Survival often depended less on skill and more on luck. Men did not need glowing wounds to suffer. They suffered because they were left exposed in mud and rain, because medical knowledge was limited, and because the machinery of war moved faster than compassion could keep up. And the cost was enormous. At Shiloh alone, more than 23,000 men were killed, wounded, or missing in just 2 days. Thousands never walked again. Thousands never went home. The battlefield was not lit by angels, but by fires, lanterns, and muzzle flashes. If there is anything that deserves our attention, it is not a comforting legend added later, but the real human price paid in blood, fear, and silence. That is the truth of Shiloh. And it does not glow. Did angels' glow happen at Shiloh? No reliable wartime record supports it. The glow comes later, created not by wounds in the dark, but by our desire to find meaning in suffering. Okay, so you've been watching The Midnight Investigator. If this interests you, please like and subscribe. We will be back for more investigations. In the meantime, question everything. Don't let someone else do your thinking.